The August 11th, 2014 meeting of the Chemung County Legislature. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Pastor?
Here.
Mr. Manchester?
Here.
Mr. Sweet?
Here.
Mr. Brennan?
Here.
Mr. Grabauer?
Here.
Mr. Highland?
Here.
Dr. Milliken? Mrs. Woodard? Here. Mr. Hitchcock?
Here.
Mr. Bennett? Mrs. Jackson? Mr. Malazzo?
Here.
Mr. Nagle?
Here.
Mr. Strange?
Here.
Mrs. Draxler?
Here. Motion to excuse Mrs. Jackson and Mr. Milliken by Mr. Malazzo, seconded by Mr. Sweet. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Motion to accept the minutes by Mr. Malazzo, seconded by Mr. Pastrick. Any corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Motion to accept the communications 8-01 to 8-11 by Mr. Strange, seconded by Mrs. Woodard. Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. At this time, we have the public comment section. Anyone wishing to speak, please do so from the podium when you are called upon. You will have 5 minutes to speak. Please state your name, your address, and if you are representing anyone or a group other than yourself. Do we have anybody in the front row? Right on down. Anybody else in that row that wants to come down, come right down here and sit along the wall.
Hi, Dr. Earl Robinson, Lawman. I want to mention the recent grant by Binghamton University to try to preserve the Chemung battlefield and the Newtown battlefield. They've been working on this for about 8 years now. And it all started when Congress did a study to see what the most important Revolutionary War and 1812 battlefields were in the United States. And they decided that Newtown battlefield was in the top 6 of those, and one of the most best attributes was that it had been destroyed, that it hadn't been developed, quotes. So they initiated a program to try to support the preservation of those battlefields. Now, over the last, they've spent some upwards of $230,000 in various grants and studies. The last one, they came up and they found the actual Battle of Chemung site where they found the bullets and the buckshot at the time having the battle. I'll just read this to you so you know what that's all about. On the evening of August 12, 1779, after ordering a gill of rum, 4 ounces for each man, General Sullivan headed out from Fort Sullivan, which was in Athens, Pennsylvania, for the war town of Chemung with most of his command, preceded by his Oneida scouts. It was rough going in the dark along the forbidden path through swamp, narrow hillside pass, and deep forest. They were only able to make 7 miles by dawn, running the last miles in a heavy fog. 2 regiments crossed the Chemung River to the south to prevent an escape in that direction into the cornfields, which allowed them to attack the town from the west. General Hand attacked the town from the north. General Poor attacked the town from the south and east with fixed bayonets at sunrise on August 13, 1779. They were too late, though. Only a few stragglers were seen to be escaping to the west from Chemung. General Hand ordered Colonel Hubley's infantry to pursue the enemy westward towards Newtown. That's right along County Route 60. A mile west of New Chemung, the trail ascended into a forested ridge. That's where my house is. Captain Bush, while scouting the area, discovered a hastily abandoned encampment where there were blankets and deerskins, fire burned, and a dog lay sleeping. With this discovery, Hubley's regiment moved forward in the fog, led by Captain Walker and 24 riflemen. As the troops approached the campfires, they were fired on twice by Captain Roland Montour and his native Senecas. In response to this, the riflemen advanced straight up the ridge in full bayonet charge while other soldiers pursued in a flanking movement. The Native Americans retreated into a swamp a quarter mile west. Colonel Hubley's regiment attempted to follow the enemy for more than a mile without success. As they halted in the swamp, General Sullivan gave orders not to pursue the enemy towards Newtown. The soldiers later referred to the ambush as the Hellhole. It was also referred to as the Chemung Ambuscade. In that battle, there were 7 men killed and 13 wounded. These included Adjutant Houston, 1 sergeant, 1 drummer, and 4 privates. Those wounded included Captains Franklin, Carberry, and Walker, as well as 1 guide and 8 privates. The Native American casualties were unknown. The town of New Chemung, which is not the town of Chemung, it's west of there, it's a big cornfield now, was lay in 2 parts, Upper and Lower Chemung, in the Rose Valley Flats, just west of Kitty Dick Curve, called the Chemung Narrows. Consisted of 50 well-built log and frame buildings and storage barns, as well as a meeting house. One large building was probably the trading post and home of the prominent Tory warden. Quantities of striped linen, 300 dressed deer and bear skins, brass kettles, pewter plates, knives, and trade goods were found. Returning to Chemung, Colonel Hubley's troops lay waste to the, quotes, pretty capital place, end quotes. They trampled the large fields of corn, beans, potatoes, squash, cucumbers, and watermelons. The larger fields felt to have been planted by the Tories to supply the British troops who invaded the frontier of the Americas and created things like the Cherry Valley Massacre, Wyalusing Massacre, etc.
You have 1 minute left.
Okay. In order to keep the British and Native Americans from knowing the number of casualties, they had the dead officers and soldiers braced upright on horses and rode back to their burial site at Fort Sullivan. This day they had lost 8 men killed and 18 wounded. So not only is this a Revolutionary War battle site, but it's also hallowed ground. These guys died there, they spilled their blood there, and I think it should be preserved. I don't think it should be impacted by the expansion of the Chemung County landfill.
Anybody in the second row want to come around down?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. I'm Duk G Shan, a PhD. I'm a resident of Elmira in Chemung County, and I would like it to be clear, I am opposed to expanding tonnage capacity at the Chemung County dump, and I'm opposed to the county's acceptance of drill cuttings from Pennsylvania, which are radioactive, into the dump. Today, I will discuss the 3 components of decision making: science, when it's available, emotion, and common sense. In fact, the title of my presentation today is Science, Emotion, and Common Sense. You might ask why I've chosen this particular topic. Over the past few months, I've heard some of you say one or more of the following. A decision on whether to expand tonnage at the dump will be made based on science. The second one is, a decision on whether to expand tonnage at the dump will be based on science and not emotion. As if science were the end all, and emotion somehow didn't count. From the beginning of humankind, we have been evolving into the beings we are at present. We're blessed with a wide array of emotions and with vast means of experiencing and expressing them. We wouldn't have evolved in this manner if emotions weren't central to our lives and our decision-making process. Also, over time, we have developed a wonderful means of practical thought, which today we refer to as common sense. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans have used common sense together with emotion to make the important decisions of life, just as we do today. Success or failure was, as it is now, often determined by how effectively we balance emotion and common sense. Too much or too little thought or emotion may render an unfortunate decision. An effective blend of emotion and common sense gives us our best chance of success, or the best chance to attain the desired outcome. Achieving this balance is not easy, especially when we are under pressure or on information overload. I'm sure you can recall a recent decision to acquire something you need or want, such as a car or a home appliance. Tell me that emotion doesn't play a role in such decisions. Then think of what happened during the family discussion that ensued. Now you're dealing with other people's emotions and sensibilities. But the decision gets made and you are either happy or not with it. Chances are you did pretty well if you blended emotion with common sense. Now what about science? Science became the third major player in decision-making triad a short few hundred years ago. Before that, we depended on common sense and emotion to make decisions. Now we have science to inform our decision-making. Not lead it, but to inform it. Science can't take the place of good decision-making, but it can enhance the process if the science is good. Good science emerges from well-constructed research, which begins by asking a critical question. The outcome is what it is. Bad science occurs when self or corporate interest identifies the desired result first, and then conducts so-called research designed to provide it. Such as when the party with the self-interest conducts or pays for the research. Beware of bad science. It can lead to legislative decisions which harm constituent health. When it is time to decide about whether to expand tonnage capacity at the dump, we want you to make a decision that considers your collective common sense combined with related emotion. Informed by science. Few important modern-day decisions have been made successfully without emotion and common sense being in abundant supply. Your constituents want you to be honest with them. They know what it means when you say things like decisions will be made based on science, not emotion. To say this to us is to tell us that you don't respect emotion, or at least to suggest it. That emotion doesn't count in your decision-making, that you don't want to deal with the complexity of the issues. We understand such comments to be cop-out. So let us not hear such comments in the future. Instead, let us inform you. But our information will include emotion, and we will not abrogate our responsibility to share it with you. Thank you for your time this evening.
Susan Vulture, former Chemung County resident, now living in Tompkins County. I assume most of you saw the paper yesterday, the Star Gazette, with its front page article whose title is Fracking Lessons to Learn. And several pages later, there's an entire page dedicated to the lessons that have been learned, and a picture as well. But in case some of you were on vacation and haven't read yesterday's paper yet, I want to run down the points. This study is based on information that was gotten from the DEP, that's the Department of Environmental Protection in Pennsylvania. And you know Pennsylvania's had several years of boom in terms of gas drilling and fracking. One point is the DEP hasn't been responding to the complaints. The complaint might be appearance, color, or smell of your water. It might be animals getting sick. It might be people having respiratory problems or nosebleeds, but the DEP hasn't responded to all the complaints that were rendered with it. The DEP has not ordered companies to clean up contaminated water when it did occur. The DEP has not inspected all the gas wells, which they're supposed to do periodically. Gas wells that are functioning, producing, and even the old abandoned ones need to be inspected now and then. And the DEP in Pennsylvania is not tracking the waste. They don't have a manifest system that follows whether it's liquid or solid waste from the point of generation at the well, or the well pad, clear until it's disposed of someplace, hopefully properly. These are very serious things that we now know are taking place or haven't taken place as they should have in Pennsylvania over these recent years, even though they have a body, the DEP, who is charged with oversight and regulation and making parties accountable. So what's my point? What do these issues raise about the Pennsylvania lack of regulation have to do with the question you're facing of whether to expand the tonnage of the Chemung County landfill? Especially when you've been told by some high-ranking officials that drill cuttings have nothing to do with fracking, end of quote. Well, folks, if somebody weren't extracting shale gas by way of hydraulic fracturing in Pennsylvania, for example, there wouldn't be these drill cuttings that are already coming to our landfill, and there will be more and more of them if you expand the overall tonnage. So to allow the drill cuttings in the Chemung County landfill allows, encourages, facilitates, enables extraction of shale gas and fracking to go on, whether it's in Pennsylvania or anyplace else, and have the consequences that I just summarized quickly from the paper. The only other point I want to make is you must get tired of some of us coming back again and again
Your 1 minute.
and saying some of the same things again, or the same things that other people have said. You know, since the January public hearing, you've been hearing these things about radiation and heavy metals. There's a saying that I only learned about 10 years ago, which is, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And what I mean here in this context is, what I say tonight or said last month might not grab you at all as particularly important or interesting, but maybe tomorrow, maybe next month, maybe a different speaker from a different angle, a different profession, or world news or local news will wake people up and say, hey, I think there was something to that point I heard earlier. So we will keep repeating, please don't continue to take drill cuttings from the Marcellus Shale into the Chemung County landfill, and please don't expand the tonnage, which would bring more. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Betty Eck. I live in Horseheads, and I'm one of the ones that Susan referred to, as you have heard from me before. I've said a lot of things, but it dawned on me I've never said one important thing, and that is thank you to all members of the legislature, because I have seen attentive listening, which I truly appreciate, and I believe truly that the listening will result in taking the correct course of action. And as I was thinking about this, I had a flashback to an evening here in this chamber, which I have since referred to as the Night of the Living Dead. And actually, on that evening, there was not the attention. There was not the respect. I sat here and watched the members of the legislature making absolutely no eye contact. No emotion was shown. I was a little tempted to go around and check pulses to make sure everyone was alive, but I didn't do that. And the issue what people spoke to, I took notes. I took at least 20 speakers for 2 hours. Was in response to Resolution 10-167, which I quote was a resolution authorizing amendments to the operation, management, and lease agreement for the operation of the Chemung County landfill in Chemung County and the Chemung County Solid Waste District. Okay. After all this speaking went on, when it was time to deal with the resolution, I believe it was 3 members of the legislature suggested that it should be tabled, given the seriousness of the concerns raised. To me, that was a no-brainer, so I thought, of course it would be tabled. It wasn't. I was stunned. What bothered me more is that the people who supported the table were the only 3 Democrats present, and I thought, maybe there's something political going on here. So, I'm hoping that's not the case, but I want to raise one new issue tonight that I don't think has been raised, and that is, who's your partner here in this endeavor? Who do you trust? I am going to pass on an article from the OBrien Times-Herald. It is in relation to Casella, having to report to the Attorney General and change its anti-competitive deals. It said, a waste hauling business that provides services in both Cattaraugus and Allegheny counties has been ordered to reform several of its business practices that violated New York State's antitrust laws. They've been fined $100,000 by the Attorney General and have been forced to shape up its practices. The article further goes on to say that there were similar charges and outcomes in 2002 and 2011 in New York. I'm sorry, Vermont. I did not speak in that Night of the Living Dead, but I did pass on a compendium of lawsuits, violations. It was many pages on the part of this industry. I passed it on. Maybe it's long forgotten, and in the interest of saving trees, I am going to email that to each legislature and beg you to read it. You may question its validity, you may dismiss it, that's your choice. But you don't have a choice about reading it. There's a second article that supports a long litany of these types of practices. Now, if we hire a teacher or a bus driver or anyone else who protects the safety of our children, we are morally obligated to do a background check. I am not sure what will be verified and what won't, but damn, this industry affects the safety of our children. So it is your obligation to read the stuff I'm going to send. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kenneth Fogarty. I'm from the town of Guilford in Chemung County, which is several counties away from here. And I've come back again. I was here last month to speak on the issue of the landfill. My background is I'm a retired mathematics professor from the City University of New York, and I served on the Bronx County Legislature, the same chamber as this one, but for that county, from 1986 until 2003, when I retired and then moved upstate. I will be making comments and alluding to certain news articles, which I have a package of, and I will give them to you at the end. I tend to approach problems as a mathematics person, and the problem that I'm looking at with the landfill is a response to a system problem. And when you respond to a problem that you observe in a system, there are two things you certainly do. You have to discover and refine the problem, and then you design a fix if possible. Now in mathematics, when we come to a very hard problem, what we usually do is back away from it, go to an easy problem, work on that for a while, and gradually work your way up. So the easy problem that I bring before us is back to the recycle bin. What does the county do when it finds that somebody threw a beer can into the recycle bin for bottles? Well, that's an easy problem. The county personnel person looks in the bin, sees the problem, and then remediates the problem by reaching in and removing the beer can and putting it into the tin can problem. Easy problem. A little harder problem is, what do you do when you find that somebody has thrown a bottle into the tin can bin? That's a little hard because maybe the bottle broke. And it's not an easy matter to pull it out with your hand. You certainly would put a glove on and to solve the problem that way. And if it broke and shattered, you'd have to empty the bin out, get all the glass out, and then patiently put back in the tin. Nonetheless, you solve the problem and you discover the problem. Now we come to the very hard problem. How do you deal with when there are the wrong things in landfill. Well, now let's look at the discovery part. If you're lucky, you might smell fumes, or you might see unsightly things flowing out of the landfill, and that would alert you to the problem that there's something wrong. And of course, you would then sit and say, how can I fix this? If you're unlucky, you don't have those advantages of a bad smell or of a flow. What usually surfaces, and I have that in these documents here, is clusters of disease appear. Now, in the Bronx, during my tenure on the legislature, I joined in 1986. The problem that we observed were clusters of strange cancers near a landfill. And that engaged our attention, and we began to look at the problem. Now, of course, when you go to fix this kind of problem, the first thing you discover is fix is impossible. You cannot go into there as you would with the shards of glass and pull those things out. The best you can do is to contain or mitigate the problem. However, that which the authorities prefer to call cleanup, which is a little misleading, it's not a cleanup. What it does is it tries to cap the problem, slow down the seepage, etc. You might think, well, that's the path that we would have to go if a problem emerges, which in large systems, certainly it will. However, it's very, very expensive. There were 5 landfills in the city of New York where we found illegal dumping over a period of 10 years. Ultimately, the persons that were involved with that went to jail and paid fines, etc. Some as long as 3 years. But 30 years later, the poisons are still coming out of the landfill. Quite expensive. The city for these 5 landfills, and the one in the Bronx was 82 acres, not huge by comparison with the one here, is about, I guess yours is a little bit bigger, $125 million to cap and try to mitigate the problem. So it's quite expensive when you try to fix this problem, and of course, again, you can never fix it. Now, look, that number doesn't include the lawsuits. There's a long line of people now suing, either the families of people who died from diseases that are correlated to these, connected to these landfills. I mentioned last month that the first case was settled. There were 11 people, $15 million. There's a long line of others that are suing on the same grounds. So I will hand you this in, and I will just tell you, the first one says the titles of these things. There's only a few of them. City is sued over Staten Island landfill. It's in there that it reminded me that that one has not yet been fixed. It's some 30 years later, and Earth Justice sued the city to begin that final remediation, which again the city likes to call a cleanup. So that's the first item. The second item is to get these things done. The court case took about 20 years for the people who settled most recently. Finally, the State Court of Appeals had to intervene, and by a 3-2 margin, the city was ordered to hear the case and listen to give a trial to it, etc., and ultimately they did get the $15 million. The chief judge in the majority opinion said, these children in the Northeast Bronx are living in an area where they are being systematically poisoned by environmental contaminants. So he insisted that they had a right to trial. And we go on, there are others, but I think I can hand that in to you. This one says Bronx landfill raises concerns over diseases. That was 1988. Going back to the first complaints that were made were way back in 1980. The point is, how did all this happen? It was a number of illegal actions. Trucks would come in the middle of the night, there would be a payoff, things were dumped in, this went on for a period of 10 years. So again, I think background checks are very, very important, and hopefully we listen and keep it as a nice town dump, and don't be bringing in things that we don't know what's in the truck from faraway places. And some of the things that we do know in the truck, we think are dangerous. Thank you, and good night.
No clapping, please. Is there anybody in the room that has not had a chance to speak that wishes to speak? If not, I will declare the public section agenda closed.